While we sleep, the guardians of the night take to the streets, having said goodbye to those they love. Each other knowing they may never say these words again, they face the evil that we run from. They dedicate their lives to those that would hate them because they wear the badge. They wear the badge not for the glory or recognition, but for the passion to help others. This is the LEO First Podcast. We'll talk to the men and women in law enforcement, those that have retired, those that keep the prisons secure, and anyone who's impacted by law enforcement. We'll peel back the curtain, and you'll get the real stories. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Every law enforcement officer has a story to tell. Get ready to hear from the men and women who put their lives on the line every day for their communities and their country. Welcome to the LEO First Podcast. Now, here's your host, Michael Laidler.
Hey everybody, Michael Laidler here, the host of the LEO First Podcast, and I'm excited to have another guest on today. And this guest is actually in Texas. I know a couple of weeks ago we had another law enforcement officer from Texas. He was from Dallas. This was pretty close to Dallas, not in Dallas. He has spent some time in that Fort Worth Metroplex area, but I'm excited. I've been following him on social media. I know he has a good following. I know he puts out great messaging. And when he agreed to be on the show, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be amazing, because it's always great to have people on the show that's currently in the field that can relate to what's going on, and individuals that demonstrate leadership through different avenues, especially social media, because there's a lot of people in law enforcement that I have seen that have no clue how to work social media to their advantage. And from what I've seen with our guest tonight, he has been mastering it. He's going to be that one that hopefully we get a chance to talk about it, because social media and everything we have going on between mental health, leadership, everything is important. And we know with Generation Z, Generation Y, and whatever new generation they come out with, we know that social media is a big part of it. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you guys to Banning Sweatland. He is our guest for tonight. Banny, tell us a little bit about yourself. Whatever you want to talk about. What do you want? What do you want the audience to know about you right out the gate?
Well, first I want everybody to know, Michael, is thank you very much for bringing me onto the show. And what I want the audience to know is I'm a normal guy, just like you, just like the listeners are. We all put our pants on the same way every day. I've been lucky that people like some of the content that I put out there, and I've been blessed with thousands, and I mean thousands of messages on LinkedIn in reference to the small posts that I've been putting out there. Quick background of myself. Didn't do so hot in high school. Didn't think I was going to amount to much, according to my guidance counselor and everything else. They told me to go ahead and pose in a Walmart type of get up, because you're pretty much going to be saying welcome to Walmart for your whole life, because you couldn't even have a relatable score on the college test to do anything. So saw a Marine Corps recruiter come in on career day, saw all the girls zip up to him, and I said, I like the look of that. And I went over there and started talking to him. And let me tell you real quickly, my father was an officer in the Air Force. He was a fighter pilot in Vietnam. Just laid him to rest a few months ago, and didn't even know what he did in Vietnam until he passed away. And never once did he ever say he was a hero. But by God, Keith Sweatland was a hero. He had a Distinguished Flying Cross during Vietnam, and he never even told me that growing up. My dad wanted me to join the Air Force. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps. And I knew that the book work to get to there, going through the Air Force Academy and stuff like that, wasn't in the deck of cards for me mentally at the time. So I spoke to a gentleman named Sergeant Smiley out of the Steubenville, Ohio recruiter's office, because I graduated out of Toronto, Ohio, just on the Ohio River there. And I'm from Texas. So those listeners that know me in Texas, born in Waco, moved all over the country, 23 different schools growing up, but decided to join the Marine Corps. Went in and surprisingly to me, when I took that ASVAB test, which is Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, similar to a college test, but probably not as hard. The recruiter told me you can have your pick of jobs, enlisted side, what you want. Gave me a nice little thick book, and I got to go home. May or may not have even told my mother that I went and took this test. So I went home, went through these jobs, and basically I remember, because back then we didn't have texting, or I think we had intramail. We didn't have email on the
Yeah, I think it
intraweb.
was
So
intramural,
I had to call the dude on the phone, pull the wire out of the wall, dial it up and call him. So I said, Sergeant Smiley, I don't even know what these MOSs mean. I don't know what they do. My dad was in the Air Force. Give me something that has what's called a high washout rate, something that's harder physical, for people to get washed out of. Because if I'm going to make this commitment, I want it to be a job that I'm proud to do.
Yeah.
And so he told me, well, you need to do security forces. And for the listeners that think that security forces is military police, in the Marine Corps, it's not. It's a Marine Corps Security Force company. We let me see how I can say. We guarded our nation's assets. Sometimes assets get moved around the country, and to be safe, they get guarded through security forces. So had an amazing 4-year stint in that. I got out 2 weeks later. The World Trade Center was hit, the Pentagon, and the field in Pennsylvania, and thought I was going to get to go back in. However, my MOS field, they had plenty of them in there, so I didn't get to re-up. So then I got to pursue my lifelong dream of becoming a police officer. And what I like to say in all the podcasts and shows that I go on is, people ask me, how long did you know that you wanted to become a police officer? I said, well, really my entire life. And there was nobody in my family for me to emulate that from. I was adopted at birth. And I was lucky. I'm not going to, I don't use that as a hiccup. I got very lucky in life. But when I was 5 years old, there's some old no sound video that my grandmother has, or my grandfather has, or my family has now, of me in my birthday suit writing at 5 years old, writing my grandmother tickets for vacuuming too fast. So at 5 years old, she was, using that vacuum cleaner in the living room. And I'm sitting there with a notepad, just scribbling on it and having her sign, telling her to press hard, you're making copies, and telling her she was vacuuming too fast. And my family just backed me my entire life for wanting to do that. And a lot of parents, they hear a kid that wants to be a cop, that's too dangerous, that's this, that's that. I had 100% backing from my entire family to do it. Again, I had nobody to emulate that from. But so now I've been in law enforcement 21 years, I guess, working on 22 years now. I've had good times, I've had bad times, but when I look back of it in a memory, I'm actually writing a book right now, just unpacking everything in my head and putting it down on paper. The good outweighs the bad tenfold. Yes, we remember the bad days. Your brain's developed to remember that, and it stains the brain when we see something bad. But the good times, when you actually unpack it all and you look at it, the good absolutely outweighs the bad. And I think that that's why my 21 plus years in law enforcement has been amazing. I've got to work municipal in a medium to large agency. I've been a reserve at a small agency when I first started out. I've been in a quote unquote gang ridden small agency south of Dallas. And so and then now I'm at a county sheriff's office, which is a complete 180 from what I've ever done, but I absolutely love it. I mean, it's an amazing thing. I'm not getting rich doing it. I'm not trying to get rich doing it, but to be able to go out there and help somebody every day, if it's from acting like your AAA, changing a tire, to removing a family violence member out of somebody's house, knowing they're not going to be hurt anymore at night, I feel that I've done my job. So in a nutshell, 21 years of law enforcement, 4 years of United States, the Marine Corps, and I wouldn't go back and change anything in my life.
Man, you definitely gave us a lot of direction to go in, which is good. And as all our listeners know, there's a lot of conversational. There's no prescriptive questions outside maybe one or two in the beginning and the end. And what I love about that is hearing your story. And one of the things that I took on early, and if I know we have the video on now, but when this comes out, it's going to be audio only. Sure. But if you ever see me looking down, Banning, it's not because I'm texting. I'm actually taking a lot of notes because I'm trying to. I've learned over the times as I've grown more gray hairs that if I don't take notes, I'm gonna forget something that I like that I want to touch on. So I see notes and I'm like, okay, let me see where I'm going with this next. So if you ever see me look down, that's what it is. But one of the things you said early on, and if the listeners missed it, obviously you can go back and you can rewind this part of just rewind parts of the show to hear us. But I want to say, you said your father's name was Keith Sweatland, right? Keith?
Yes, sir.
One of the things you said about him, and I always want our viewers to know and other law enforcement officers to start doing more, is sharing our experiences to our loved ones. Because if you would have heard like some of his stuff in Vietnam before, not saying you would have shifted your life, but his stories are impactful because it sounds like he was still a good father. And sometimes you hear about veterans that have that experience in Vietnam, how their PTSD was so strong that they kind of left their family behind or they couldn't do this. But it seems like even with you being adopted, he was very loving. He was caring. He was there. And although he probably pushed you to go to the Air Force, he accepted and believed in you still. And although you went opposite of probably what he wanted, at least in the Marine Corps. But when you think about like his story and you think about your story now, how important do you think it is for law enforcement officers to share their stories quickly rather than hold on to them and wait?
So the question is, how important is it to tell them?
Yeah, like to tell your story early and often.
It is. Not to even segue into mental health, but it's very good to tell the stories.
Yeah, let's transit. Let's go right into it. Go. And let's say tell us why.
So I believe when you tell your story, it's either good or bad. Obviously, if you're off duty and I don't know, let's put it in a church setting or even a bar setting, depending on how young the officer is. And I mean, they're excited to be a police officer. And in their mind, they go out and tell the story. What that does is when that officer sees reactions from, I don't want to call it normal people, but people that don't get the experiences of what law enforcement personnel go through, it's almost a sense of relief. When they're not looking at you like you're crazy or this and that, but when they're in tune to your story and they're listening to it, and they may be adding to it or asking more questions of it, that's almost a therapeutic, because we do see a lot of bad stuff. So when you're talking to normal people and you're letting them know what we do out there day in and day out, for one, it lets them know what we're doing. They get a little piece of kind of what's going on that's not on Cops. It's not an edited TV show or live or whatever you want to call it, but you're getting it right from the source. And I believe it helps two things. It helps that citizen that may not know what we do to hear a story from a commissioned law enforcement officer. And it helps that law enforcement officer almost get something off his chest to somebody he may not even know. Obviously, they're not breaking any policies at the city. They're just giving them a hypothetical, this story happened, but they're not giving names, locations, times, and dates, if that makes sense. But I believe it helps both parties, anybody that's invested or listening into that story.
Yeah, I love the part where you talked about like the therapeutic side of it, because you're right. For a lot of people that instruct or they teach, just that reaction of, even if whatever reaction you get, hopefully it's approval, because you always want to see a smiling face. But when you start sharing your own story, you never know who you're going to touch with it. You never know who you're going to relate to. But as soon as you put it out there into the world, you realize that there might be more than you that's been adopted. There may be more than one person that struggled in high school. There may be people that went from municipalities, the sheriff's office, did the 180s. And it's not until you put it out there that they understand that, okay, you're thriving, you're surviving, you're doing what you have to do. And once you tell your story, that's when people start to believe even more of whatever you're saying.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to segue, I'm going to head back to where you said, but your father was accepting on you going in the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. He absolutely was. So, but let me go into the first, and I'll make this fast.
No, go ahead. Go. We got time.
I'm 17 years old. I'm a senior in high school. I've signed the legal paperwork, which means nothing because you're not 18 yet, but that the recruiter makes you think that it's your butt belongs to me and now you're going in the service and yeehaw type of thing. So I've signed this. Now I've got to go home and tell my parents. I told my mother. She started crying, not in sadness and happiness. And I'm not going to just stick around a small town and go work at a grocery store. I'm going to try to do something with my life, because my brain and my grades in school would tell you otherwise. I'm probably going to be the homeless guy under the bridge. And if any of your viewers are in high school or you have kids in high school and they're struggling, it is not the end. I'm going to tell you right now, it is not the end. But going back to the conversation with my father, so I called him up. He lived in where was it at? Fort Walton Beach, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, high-ranking Air Force officer, is Eglin Air Force Base. And so I called him and I told him I made some career changes and I wanted to share it with him. And being an Air Force, very respected Air Force officer now that I'm finding out, he got very dialed up and in tune. Of course, he was in tune if I was telling him about a football game that I played. And, we lived over 1,000 miles from each other. But now that I'm telling him I'm making a career change, he's all ears. He's listening.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he didn't listen in the past, but so he's like, well, Banning, tell me what you're thinking about doing. And I said, well, sir, I'm going to tell you what I am doing. And that took a lot to muster and come out to an Air Force officer and somebody that raised me, knowing that it's a very structured lifestyle when you're next to him, which made my life better.
Yeah.
I said, Dad, I've decided to join the military. And there was some silence. And you never knew with my dad in that 5 seconds of silence what that meant. So then he came back and he was like, well, Banning, what branch did you decide to join and which OCS program are you doing? And a lot of people, the layperson that doesn't know much about military, and I don't expect you to know it, and that's why I'm going to tell it to you.
Yeah, go ahead.
OCS stands for Officers Candidate School. So each branch of military, whatever you go into, you can go in and take the ASVAB, like I said, for the enlisted or the working man. I used to jack with my dad a little bit. And then you have the Officers Candidate School, and that's the guys that are going to go. Air Force is going to be the Air Force Academy, Army. You've got a couple of different schools in the Army that you can go to. West Point being one of them. A lot of my buddies went to West Point. But I told him, I said, well, I'm going to go to the School of Hard Knocks, Dad. And I've got this stuff written down on a paper from Sergeant Smiley.
You don't miss your notes.
And I'm looking at them and I'm reading them and I'm telling them and I'm waiting for a response. And he goes, okay, Banning, I can't read between the lines of what you're trying to say. I said, Dad, I'm joining the United States Marine Corps. My primary job in there will be an 0311 or a rifleman. And that means I'm going to be a grunt, Dad. I'm going to work for a living. And then secondly, and then he stopped me. He goes, what the heck do you mean in different words? Do you mean work for a living? And I said, well, like guys in the Air Force that are officers, they sit at a desk all day. They have a secretary.
Yeah.
I'm sure when you wake up, you probably got a maid that you knew when you were in Air Force Academy. Because this is what the recruiter told me. So you had somebody come in and make your beds. And then you had, your chow hall was Red Lobster. And of course, the recruiter was setting me up as a joke, thinking I knew it was a joke. And I took everything like he knew what the Air Force was. And let me tell you something. So my dad said, this is real funny. What are you really joining? And I said, Dad, I'm really going to the Marine Corps. And he hung up. And I thought maybe the line got disconnected. Maybe Fort Walton Beach was getting some kind of hurricane. And I was like, well, I'll talk to him next week. That's when I gotta call him again because we call each other on Saturdays.
Yeah.
So he called me back about an hour later. And what his wording was is Banning is I don't typically drink on a Saturday, but I've decided to go downstairs and make a creme de menthe in honor of you and the stupid decisions that you're making. And I said, well, how is that a stupid decision, sir? So now I'm going to sir instead of dad.
Yeah, you're trying to figure it out. Dang it.
Yeah, I truly wanted to know what he meant. And I wanted to make sure I wasn't making him upset, even though it was my life. And basically, he just poured his heart out. He gave me a 2-minute beautiful spiel that basically said, Banning, I've had everything ironed out for you. I wanted you to go to OCS, and you're going to go to an F-16 fighter squadron, kind of follow my footsteps, and I'd love to eventually see you be stationed down here in Fort Walton Beach, and whatever aircraft equipment that you'd be flying in at the time, and then we kind of high five each other. And I told him, Dad, I love it. Thank you very much, and that's a huge honor. However, if I'm going to do something with my life, I need to do it on my own.
Correct.
And I think he took that respectful, because it was another moment of silence, and for the fact that he actually showed up to my graduation was huge, because he never talked. He always thought he was raising a son to go into officer school, and I was his only. I was the only kid that he had, but he wasn't disappointed. So I'd read it all wrong, and he came to my graduation. He wrote me a lot of letters while I was in boot camp. He sent me a couple gifts while I was in boot camp, and we cannot accept any gifts at all. One of them how do I say this for PG listeners? So one of them was an inflatable object. And once my recruiters once my drill instructor saw this was my first week in boot camp. Okay, literally got to our squad bay. I'm scared crapless. I mean, I'm petrified because I've never seen Full Metal Jacket. I never watched any military stuff growing up. I think I saw the movie Platoon.
Not
really paying attention to it as a kid. I pretty much dirt biked and went shooting in the woods and didn't pay attention to high school. That was my life growing up. We didn't have much to do in Toronto, Ohio. I had a blast. But when my feet hit those all-inclusive yellow footprints on Parris Island, because I was east of the Mississippi when I got recruited, my life got flipped upside down real fast in a hurry, but built me up to the man that I am today real fast in a hurry. And Michael, as a matter of fact, about 2 months ago, one of my drill instructors reached out to me on LinkedIn.
Wow.
I don't know if his last name is Meeks. I'll tell you that. And that man was amazing. And he reached out for a friend request, and I looked at the name and I looked at the face. It's been over 20 years, and I'm trying to zoom in on that little icon, and I'm looking at it. And Michael, now I'm an adult. I've got a family. I've gotten in fights for my life out on the street, and I had the largest. And I hope he's listening to this. I had the largest flashback of get your ass in the sandbag or in the sandbox. Your ass belongs to me. When I saw that face, and I quickly zoomed it out, but it was a good. So Meeks, if you're listening, that was that very positive, but quick flashback of boot camp. But boot camp was amazing for me. It turned me from, I wasn't so much of a little crap, but I didn't know what I was capable of, and boot camp quickly figured that out for me. So I didn't mean to take that into a million-hour story, but Dad was at graduation. And for me to pass boot camp with everything that was said to me in high school was an amazing feat. And I just appreciate all the support that I got when I was in boot camp from guys I went to high school with, and my grandparents. My grandfather was a World War II pilot, so I have all these pilots in my family, and he flew what's called the hump over in China, Burma, and he flew 88 missions over it in a big cargo plane. I've seen pictures of it, and he got turned into Swiss cheese a lot. And he got very lucky to land. I'm surprised they didn't do a big movie on the China Burma stuff in World War II, but pretty amazing pilot as well.
Honestly, everything you said, this is what the show's about, because we all go through things, and sometimes we minimize some of our major life events because we think people don't think it's important. And your story, once again, it resonates because people have gone through some tough things. And the fact that you were told you would be nothing, and you said, well, no, I'm going to be something. And then you knew one of those things would be pushing against your father, who you knew was in a whole nother military discipline. It says a lot about your character. It says a lot about your tenacity, even as a teenager, because a lot of us go through a lot of things. And one of the things that we have to be able to push through is obstacles. And just from your decision of going into the Marine Corps at 17, you went through multiple obstacles. It wasn't like you took the ASVAB and you scored so high that they said, hey, you pick your MOS. Like, it wasn't one of those, or you said like you had you had all the military forces coming to you. Like, you didn't have none of that. Like, you had to go get it. And you knew by getting certain things, you would have that pushback. So when we think about our lives based on what you're saying, it's important for people to know that you're going to face obstacles, and you're going to have to make life decisions that are important to you. Because if you're just thinking about everybody else, you're never going to be there. So if you just thought about what your father would think, you would probably never join the Marine Corps. You would have tried for the Air Force, and you'd have kept failing at it because you were trying to live his dream, not yours.
Exactly.
So it's important for people to understand that, given what you even went through at that early age, was important. And then another thing you said, you went to 23 different schools when you were younger. I mean, I thought I had about 8 or 10 under my belt. You said 23. I said, oh, he got me by at least double. but it's all the little things that add up to who we are today. So when we talk about who we are and what you've been through, obviously we haven't even touched on your law enforcement experience yet, but when you look back at some of the things that happened to you, even in high school, one of the things I like to talk about is overcoming failures. How do you, and obviously you failed at some things. Obviously, if you weren't getting good grades, you weren't getting A's, because A is the bar for doing well in school. I mean, that's just the way the US is. We rate people based on A's and B's. A's mean it says you're smart, doesn't mean you're common sense smart, doesn't necessarily even mean you're a hard worker, because if you have the right teachers and certain like athletes, so sometimes how they get A's, like especially the hard working athletes, I don't know how they do it. Like, I don't know how they have the time to do both, but it is that measuring stick. So when you look at just even that, defining who you are as a person back then, how do you think it shaped you to who you are today?
I think it's got a lot to do with who I am today. There was times that like I said, I've lived all over, and we were kind of really down on hard times. My mother and I had nothing to do bad with my father. They I was adopted at birth, and then they got divorced when I was 5. And life happens. I mean, there's a million guys and gals out there that's got that same story. However, I believe mine may be a little bit different in a sense of how much my mother fought for me when we lived in Las Vegas. We lived in this little 2-bedroom apartment. When I say little, I mean, you put a single bed in one of those bedrooms, you can either have the bed or you can have the drawers.
Wow.
You can't choose both because it's small. And just because the prices in Vegas, back then were, back in the late 80s, early 90s were just expensive. And where am I going out with this? So we lived there. And then when I went to that school, I think the school was called Kenny C. Gwynn. It was a little middle school off Flamingo Boulevard in Vegas. And I remember my mother's car broke. The car was paid for. The mechanic was nice enough to allow us to use his personal car while he was fixing it. My mom was doing different odd jobs and doing different things to get the car fixed. And I was just trying to concentrate on school and of course adapting to another new school. Right. I think this was sixth or seventh grade. I can't remember. I think it was 6th grade. The school was so big, Michael, that we had teacher hall monitors and student hall monitors because it was one-way traffic in the school. So when that bell rang and you came out, you had to always take a left out of the classroom. Even if your class was across the hall, you had to go left and go around. It was like a big figure 8. So
wow,
you're like hurting. And then when you had to start merging over as you got close to your class. And then if you missed it, you're going to get some cardio and you're going to go back again and probably get a tardy on top of it.
That's big.
And I've always been raised my whole life. Color doesn't mean anything. A human is a human is a human. So when I hear this crap kicking off on whatever media channel, I'm not going to say one's bad or good. They all have their goods. They all have their bads. True. But I had to walk to school sometimes when she had to go to work, and it wasn't like, walk through 10 miles. No, it was about a 1.5 mile walk. A very congested street, but I had a sidewalk and everything. It's not like I was playing Frogger. But I was the new kid in school, and we weren't in the best area of town. Didn't have the best clothes, and I look back and I'm proud of that now. I got to see what majority of people go through in life, and I got to live it for a long time. So I had my secondhand backpack and my Walmart jeans, and not saying I still got Walmart jeans. They're not bad.
Me too. Don't worry.
Back then, the way styles were in school, if you weren't going along with the trends, they would actually do physical harm to you in some school districts and cities. So I didn't care what the trend was. If the jeans fit and the shirt fit, hat, whatever, you're good to go. So, but I'd walk to school and I passed the 7-Eleven every day, and sometimes I'd have some extra change and I'd go in and get a Snickers. So I had about $3 to my name every day on my way to school. Back then, that was $300 to me. So I could spend $1 at 7-Eleven. I could spend $1.50 for my lunch. And then I had about 50 cents left over to play video games on the way home. I had two plays at what was it? It was a karate game, a stand-up karate game. It had Ryu and Ken, and it was a cool karate game.
Street Fighter.
That's it. I think it was Street Fighter 2 just came out.
Yep,
so,
I played it too. Don't worry, I'm with you.
And 7-Eleven had it. And that was my kind of, because I used to get I'm not going to be, I used to get my ass beat all the time in school. I didn't know how to fight. They would see a tall, redheaded kid that had a Texas accent, and they would say, "That's the new kid. Let's turn him into our, what."
Yeah.
So guys would come up and just pick shit with me, and I just leave my hands down, and I get bruised up and go home. And finally, my mom was like, we got to do something about this. I said, that'd be great. This is getting a little old.
Yeah.
And so she enrolled me into this kind of like a Cobra Kai dojo, man. There was a lot of kids in it. Now, no licensing intended on that. It was a dojo to where they would basically teach you how to street fight.
Wow.
And so I'm in 6th or 7th grade, and this guy's teaching me, how to cut the air off of people and do all this stuff. I said, "Are we allowed to do this?" And he would real quickly jump back and, "Oh, this is only last line of defense kind of stuff." And it was kind of a joke. I mean, where I'm going at, but it also taught me how to take a hit and learn how to deliver a hit. That's pretty much what I learned in that. I think my mom could afford 2 weeks of it, and I went to it 6 days a week. But at least I could defend some things, block some stuff, run, do some things that, if there was too many of them, I couldn't take it. But I got to learn a lot of that in Las Vegas, kind of stand up for myself. So there was many days walking to school that I didn't get to school with any money, if that makes sense. They would take my $3 and I would come home and know my mom would bust her butt and do things. And I just couldn't wait for dinner to be ready. She's like, "My God, you're growing so fast." And I wanted to tell her, I haven't eaten anything today.
Yeah.
Because I got my rear end beat by high school kids at the 7-Eleven. I'm in 6th grade. And then finally, right before I got to move there, the 3 guys were mainly doing it. I got one-on-one time with them. Not them doing it, not me. So I should say one-on-one time defending myself. But when they were on their own, it was a little bit easier. Yeah. And I finally learned their fighting styles and was able to use that against them. So that got to help me segue into the Marine Corps, because we had to learn how to fight in the Marine Corps, which was a completely different style. But I could stand my ground with what's called the pugil sticks, based on Las Vegas, Nevada, on what I went through as a child. That gave me my drive for that. So I truly believe every step that I've gone through growing up has actually developed me for what's going to be next in my life.
Yeah, it's crazy how when you start tying the different life situations together, like your time in 6th or 7th grade in Vegas to your times in the Marine Corps going through their battling style, and even now things you go through, like it's crazy how everything builds. And back then, when you were going through the Marines, through that particular training, did you remember the times when you were in 6th and 7th grade and said, were you able to reflect on that time at that young age? Or is it something that now you're a little bit older with a family that you start looking at all your life history and you're like, man, this is how this built? Or was it like, when did it happen that you actually realized that these 6th and 7th grade experiences got you to where you are? So
when I got to boot camp and I was on my own, meaning you're away from your parents for the first time, which was, of course you're a young man. So it's like you're celebrating it while you're in the airport, looking at the recruiters walking towards you. I'm not the recruiters, but your first drill instructors. Yeah. So when I'm in South Carolina and these first drill instructors are walking towards me, and I'm 18, I've got hair just down past my ears in the back, not going to say it was a mullet, but I go up to him and I'm going out to shake their hand, be a gentleman. And he starts off with the yelling. Like I said, I've never seen the movies. Yeah, I didn't go into any junior ROTC. I thought the guy had a hearing problem. And I've got a couple other recruits with me that we were on the plane, but don't know each other, didn't talk, didn't sit next to each other. I noticed they had the same file folder as I had. It basically says, your bub belongs to the Marine Corps for 4 years. You're about to get indoctrinated. So this guy starts yelling at me and I'm a little standoffish. So he's in my face. I kind of put my hand on him, push him back a little bit. He was a corporal. I didn't know he was a corporal at the time. I didn't know rank structure.
Yeah.
I just remember he had 2 stripes on his sleeve. He's wearing a Charlie uniform, had a DI hat on. And I pushed him away and he said, "Oh," he just started yelling, "Oh, what do you think you're doing?" And I'm just like, "I hear you fine. You don't have to yell at me. I have very good hearing." And then he's like, "Oh, you're going to give me 50 now." And I'm like, "I've got $12 to my name. Not going to get it out of me. I need the $12 to get where we're going." And he just starts barking in this ear. And then I got another one that comes up, starts barking in my right ear. And I kind of push him away. And I'm like, I turn around. The two guys standing behind me were scared to death that they were about to kill me. So they start walking backwards. And that was my first inclination that I had no clue what to expect.
Yeah.
So by the time we got from the terminal, this is pre 9/11, they were allowed to meet us right there where the plane comes out.
Yeah.
All the way to the Greyhound bus that takes us to Paris Island, 200-300 sets of push-ups. I mean, I'm just like, my knuckles were getting messed up, and I'm like, God, I didn't have to do this in football. What the heck is going on here? I signed a contract.
The recruiter
Thought I
tell
was
you
going to
this.
get a Jeep. Thought I was going to get a Jeep, and I was going to drive to this fabulous base. We're going to work out on the beach for a while, and then I was going to go to the security force place, and they were going to teach me how to do harm and to protect our country if I had to, and then I get to go on vacations. And it was not at all what I expected. So I was literally the layman coming into the Marine Corps that knew nothing about it. But when I got out of it, meritoriously promoted, that
Right.
12 weeks, we were the first platoon to do what's called the Crucible in the Marine Corps. It's a new, I don't want to call it Hell Week. That's all the Navy SEALs, and they're some badasses. I got a lot of Navy SEAL friends, but the Crucible is its own categorically. It's Hell on Earth Week in a sense of you're with a small fire team and you're pushing through all these obstacles with hardly any food. You got plenty of hydration. They're not going to do that to you. But you basically have only 1 or 2 MREs for 2 or 3 days, those meals ready to eat. And you've got to get together and figure out how to get through these obstacles, get to the next. And if you don't do it the right way, you're going to stay at that obstacle. And we had CBS, CNN, Parade Week, all these different media companies out there filming us as we're cutting ourselves, going all over all this stuff. They would pull the media away when we're going over some of the obstacles. They didn't want them to get whatever Mothers Against the Military upset or whatever, and there was reasons that they did that. But that Crucible was the hardest thing that I've ever gone through. Everything in boot camp was hard. There was nothing that was easy.
Yeah, of course.
Firing range, I loved. I happened to be naturally good at it. I loved it. Got out as an expert on the rifle the first time, but everything other than that, hard as hell. Jumping off the platform into a pool with all your gear on, and they're telling you to float for however many minutes. It seemed like it was 5 hours, but they teach you if you just stop and listen. These drill instructors were teaching you for success. But if the monotony around you was driving you crazy, you were going to fail. So I taught myself to it's kind of like when a sniper is on target. If he sits there and he's only looking through that scope and he doesn't back up and check his surroundings, he's going to fail.
Correct.
Down here's where you need to be when it's time to take that hit shot or whatever you want to call it. But if you don't come up and you check your surroundings and you're starting to listen, use all your senses, because you're probably going to get some answers out here that aren't in the scope. And I had to learn that in the Marine Corps. And when I did that and I started listening to these drill instructors, they were giving us the answer to everything through rapid heartache.
Yeah.
But if we just filtered it, we could do success. And eventually everybody caught on to that, but I caught on to it really early. And thank God I was able to do that. But it kind of made my boot camp experience a little bit easier.
Yeah. So as now you take this listening to your surroundings, looking around, not getting too tunnel vision. It's one of the things we like, law enforcement, that's the kind of terms we like as we correlate to that. How has that impacted your leadership style now? Because as a leader, if you just stay focusing on the scope, you don't see everything around you. So as we've talked about reflection and different things that happen in our lives, I think you make a great point of how you started to listen to just what was going on in boot camp, and they gave you the answers, So now in leadership, how do you apply that now in leadership? Like like that concept.
So for leadership, and a lot of them is a briefing before we're going to go to a call. Let's say it's a priority one call, and we may have 3 to 5 minutes to talk, either on a secure channel on the radio because we're running code 3 to a location, maybe on the cell phone because I'm working with a lot of young guys, and I know they're going to a location, maybe a call they've never been to before, and it's going to be trial by fire, and I'm basically giving them the scoop they need to be learning. Because I'm going to tell you right now, and I really don't care the backlash that I get, but there's not enough training in this region to keep law enforcement safe. And that's where I come in, because I will train these guys on my off time to make sure that they go home at the end of the night. That's a big thing to me. So in reference to leadership, I will get on the phone with a guy that maybe he was with me for FTO for his ghost phase. For those that are listening, that's the kind of the last check ride, little week of you're kind of a ghost, you're not answering any questions, but I'm going to give them some leadership advice when I'm sitting next to them, as long as my talking is not interrupting what's going on in the field.
Their decision making.
So, yeah, absolutely. So if we're, like I said, so going back to a priority call, we're on our way there. If I've got them on the phone or on a secure channel, and when I say secure, we're blessed to have a channel to where I can talk car to car and dispatch can't hear. It's not to keep dispatch out of the loop. They just don't happen to have that channel on their console. So, and it's an encrypted channel, so it doesn't even go over scanners. Nice. Now, we don't talk about people's information. We do all that on the proper channels. This is, hey, dude, we're going to this call. This guy's got a long gun, and this is what I want you to do. And as we're driving there, and I've got my cruise control on whatever amount, I pull up YouTube Earth or Google Earth on my computer, and I'm zooming in because out here we're in a rural area, so we might be going to a 300-acre compound with a house in the middle, and we've got a gate out front, and this is a domestic involving weapons. We're going to be doing some traversing. We're not exactly shooting an azimuth. We're not guiding ourselves in moonlight or anything like that. But out in the country, everybody does what? When I say everybody, the majority of them, they hunt.
Yeah,
so we deal with a lot of people with 308s, 223s, 5.56s. There's a lot of people out here that have 50 cals.
Correct.
So the vests that we're wearing, I mean, that's just kind of like a round going through hot butter.
Yeah.
So we want to utilize everything going up. So when I'm talking about leadership, I'm reminding them about box breathing. And I'm going to tell you right now, I hate the word tactical because it's so overly used. But if you look up tactical breathing on an iPhone app or an Android app store, you're going to get all these free breathing apps. And I'm going to tell you right now, I learned what tactical breathing, box breathing, triangle breathing, whatever you want to call it. I learned that firsthand in the Marine Corps with running. My recruiter didn't tell me I'm going to go run 7 miles with a rucksack on for fun. I ran 2 times around that track for the recruiter, and he's like, "Hey, you're good." Holy crap, man. No, I wasn't. So going back to what taught me in the Marine Corps, what I had to learn the hard way, when I ran long distance, learning how to hold my arms down and not hold them up here for circulation, because I'm a bigger guy. God didn't exactly bless me with a neck either. and trying to breathe and run long distance at 260 pounds in the Marines was tough. So I had to learn box breathing on my own. So basically, I would figure out this breathing pattern to where I wouldn't pass out and keep up with the group. And I struggled more to this. I've never even told anybody this. I struggled so hard on those runs, Michael. I can't even imagine a guy my size going through there now and doing it. I mean, I was praying to God when we were doing our stretching before a run, please don't die today. They always told me if you passed out, there would be a Navy corpsman with what's called a silver bullet that's going to rectally insert it if you pass out to get your core temperature to find out if they needed to call an ambulance. Yeah. And I'm going to tell you something right now. I didn't pass out. So I did everything I could from hydration. And then I learned box breathing naturally. Nobody taught it to me. And doing that for me on long runs, even to this day, if I'm doing cardio, I'm doing that style of breathing. So if I can teach my young deputies and young officers around here how to do breathing when they're driving that car,
it helps.
It's going to calm those emotions. It's going to calm their radio traffic. Same with dispatchers. Dispatchers are just as important piece of the puzzle. If they aren't breathing properly in dispatch and they're putting that information out to law enforcement or any first responder, and it's excited, it naturally excites the side that's listening to it.
Easily.
And I know I'm preaching to the choir to you on that, but people have really got to learn to enunciate their words in the time of stress, and they've got to learn to breathe. So if we take care of our bodies while we're going to a priority one call, you're going to have a lot less wrong people getting shot. You're going to have a lot less officers' injuries, and the better decisions are going to be made. So my bottom line is I get to teach these guys life-saving tools when the blinders come on. It's almost like a pursuit. So now we're going to be running code for possibly 45 minutes to an hour, depending on where we're going. And a lot can go on in your mind, from updates on the call to dispatcher saying she's back on the line. She hears screaming. She hears help me. And you're like, I'm the only person that can save them, and I'm still 25 miles away. So it's that breathing, and it's that, because if we don't get there safe, we're not helping anybody.
That's true.
And that's another thing I'm telling these guys. Your car may run 147 miles an hour, but if you hit something and you die, now I've got to go deal with that call. Then I got to come back and hopefully save your life, or not. Now I got to go talk to your wife or your husband. Let's think about this as we're driving. So DPS, or the Department of Public Safety here in Texas, the state troopers put on an amazing class, and that's called Below 100. And that's to get
below 100,
the amount of officers across this country below 100 deaths a year. And if a lot of our death, as well as I do, if you look at Officer Down Memorial page, it's high. It's getting higher every year.
It is.
And the ones that they're not reflecting on is suicide. Now, we can segue that in a little bit, but the motor vehicle accidents are so high up on that graph. So if we can be the ones, even in our small little county where I work at, slow down, breathe, get there safely, because if you don't, then there's no chance in hell for these people. We took an oath to protect people. We didn't take an oath to wreck a life on the way to a call. If we can control that on the way to the call while breathing, hopefully everybody can go home at the end of the night. But at least we've done everything we could to control our own actions before we get there. And I think that's the important thing. So, and I know it's really helped a lot of the people here. I know we're a small county. And I talk about that in some of my videos on LinkedIn is we got to control our emotions, and we're all human beings. We all put our pants on the same way every day. Yeah. But there's some things we need to do as law enforcement and first responders to make sure we are professional. And part of that is the leadership. And I don't care if you don't have the rank on your friggin' sleeve, you are a leader. If you're going on the scene, and that is, your FTO has always told you, when you make it to the scene and until a ranking officer gets there, that's your scene. Guess what? You're the leader until somebody else comes and relieves you of those duties. So I don't care if you're an officer and you've been out of the academy for 2 weeks, or out of training, FTO for 2 weeks, and you're on a scene and you're looking around for your FTO and he's not there anymore. Now it's you. You're the friggin' leader. It's up to you. Nobody else is coming. So you've just got to remember that in your career as a young officer. And I highly encourage people to take as much leadership. And I also highly encourage brass and admin across this country, chiefs, sheriffs, chief deputies, all the way down to lieutenants, sergeants and corporals. Get your guys into leadership courses, accredited, good leadership courses. They're not going to come take your job. You've got to help your agency by helping these young guys do that. So it's going to help everybody.
No, and you're right. All the points you hit on, especially in continuous training and promoting training, and realizing that if we just go through the basics as far as just firearms, driving, report writing, that's part of the job. But you start looking at leadership, which you don't need the title. Like you said, I mean, I remember being a younger officer in different organizations, and while I was the youngest one there, they didn't just say, "Oh, I'm the sergeant, I'm taking over." Sometimes, like, "Hey, if you're doing a good job, I don't want to take over." So you may see that chief walk up or that sheriff walk up, and he or she might, they're like, "Well, you're working the scene. Why am I going to take over now?" And have to start all the way over. So you're right that you may be that officer that's 2 weeks out. More likely, you won't get that much if the sheriff gets there. But 2 or 3 years in, 5 years in, you have a sheriff that's 20 years. If you're handling your business, and that sheriff and that chief is confident about themselves, you're still going to be handling business. They're not going to take the scene from you, because if a good leader is going to see that and say, "You know what? you got this. So, and you don't need that title to lead people. You just have to understand that you're there for a reason, and through your training and things you want to be good at, that's where it's going to really come out at.
Exactly. And it's, and these guys, we're one of the, I'm not proud to say this, but we're one of the lower paid agencies in the state. But guess what? The people that pay their taxes here deserve just as much professionalism as somebody down in Dallas or Fort Worth. So these young guys that guys and gals that get hired on here, once we break that ice and we know each other, maybe a lot of times my wife and I will take a new officer out to eat once he's gotten through training, or even during training. And the reason I do that is not for them to say, man, I owe this guy something. And I lay that out real quick. I'm taking you out to dinner so you can meet my family, you can meet my children. We're here in the town that we live now, and show them how much we're invested in the community. And I want them to see what I'm coming home at the end of the night. My wife is a longtime dispatcher. She was a dispatch supervisor in the city of Grapevine, and then she was a dispatcher down in the city of Haltom City, where I used to work. And I can say those names without any issue. We both attribute our careers on what we were taught in those agencies, and they may not be the biggest agencies in the world, but let me tell you something, they are some of the best. If you come to Texas and you're like, where do I need to go learn something to where I can go somewhere else and take some leadership? Look at Haltom City, Texas. Chief Cody Phillips is there, and he's the biggest, best patrol officer's chief you'll ever meet. When I first got there, he was a motor jock. We used to go out and have a good time, eat pizza together, have a blast. And now he's the chief of police there, and he's one of the most professional guys you'll ever meet. And he truly wants what's best for his department, because he knows if he gets that, the citizens that he works for will get the best treatment that's available. So he gets the guys, the motor jocks, all the best radars, the best bikes. That traffic unit there's got a freaking Camaro.
They're doing good.
Gets brand new Tahoes with Phoenix lighting on the outside, which is one of the best emergency lighting across the country, to make sure that drunk drivers aren't slamming in the back into them as often. And he sends them to training like you wouldn't believe. I got more training in Haltom City than I've gotten anywhere else in my career. And so I take my hat off to those guys. They're a great group of guys there, and I miss the heck out of them.
You've been listening to the LEO First Podcast. Michael has been in law enforcement since 2005. He's worked for 3 law enforcement agencies in 3 different states. He's a professional speaker who travels the country teaching about leadership development and self-awareness. And he's the author of a book called Greatness Beyond the Badge: The 3 Key Principles for Self-Awareness. It's Michael's passion to bring law enforcement members' stories to the front, so you get the real and raw take. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with Michael on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Michael Laidler, on Twitter at Michael A. Laidler, on Facebook at Michael Laidler Leadership. Send an email to michael@michaelalaidler.com and hit the website at michaelalaidler.com. See you next time on the LEO First Podcast.